Russia, then and now.
Yeah, hi, I'm Mark from An American in Russia. Today I'm going to continue with my Russia, Then and Now series, and I'll talk about food, well, specifically pelmeni. Now, before I start, I'll address all of you purists out there. Yes, I've heard that pelmeni came from China via the Mongol hordes, but I don't care. Russians perfected it and they made it famous. Just as American baseball supposedly came from a British game called Rounders, or even as my Russian friends suggest that it came from a Russian game called Lopta. However, American baseball is a multi-billion-dollar sport with huge stadiums and millions of viewers. Rounders and Lopta are not. So in the same way that baseball is American, pelmeni are Russian. Sorry, I'm easily distracted. Back to pelmeni. For my non-Russian listeners who don't know what pelmeni even is, it's a type of pierogi, but very specific. Now, pierogi is a term in English that we use to describe a Polish family of foods which share some traits, and who knows, maybe they're based on Russian pelmeni. Well, pelmeni is a meat filling wrapped with a thin dough outer, just wrapped in thin dough. These are boiled and then they're eaten. For my Russian listeners, let me help you with some words that you've learned that are really not correct. I've heard pelmeni translated as ravioli in English, and this is absolutely not correct. This dough for ravioli is absolutely a pasta dough. It's much different. The consistency and taste of the meat filling is absolutely different than pelmeni. And ravioli are almost always served with a tomato sauce, spaghetti sauce. There are no similarities between the two, apart from the fact that they're both food. So why in the hell would you use this word in translation? I don't know. Pelmeni are also translated as small meat dumplings in English. But since many to most English speakers have heard of the word dumpling, usually in some old British poem, song, or children's fairy tale, few of us have actually seen one, much less eaten one. So to use the words small meat dumpling does nothing to help us understand what you're talking about. For an American English speaker, the best word to use might be pierogi. This is something similar, which was originally brought to the US by Polish people. They're quite a bit smaller. The pierogi are smaller, not Polish people. But at least this description gets us to the correct neighborhood, and a visual image is now starting to form in my head of what we're talking about. I'm speaking about pelmeni today because of all Russian foods. This seems to be the one that Russians most closely associate themselves with. Again, remember, this is all my opinion, my observations. Now, some people, well, certainly not Russians, will also say that pelmeni and vareniki are the same thing, which any Russian person or resident of Russia understands is not correct. In my opinion, vareniki are made with much thicker dough. They're shaped differently and are typically filled with either mashed potatoes or curd. Curd is sort of like a cottage cheese. Vareniki are Ukrainian in origin. Now, I mentioned that pelmeni are filled with a meat filling, but there are other variations. One is a mushroom filling and another is a cabbage filling. I've even heard of people using a cherry filling, but Russian purists will inform you that this would be vareniki. Pelmeni are not fruit-filled. Okay, let's shift gears here. The first appearance of pelmeni in Russia was in Siberia. This is what I read anyhow. And most likely was introduced by one of the groups of people that were native to that area. You see, pelmeni is a great winter food for people and for winter in Siberia. And winter in Siberia makes up the majority of the year. So most families had a house in which they lived and then a separate house in which their pelmeni was stored, and probably other food. and it was kept frozen in that other house. I suspect that the making of pelmeni was a real family affair which occupied several weeks of days. Pelmeni was nice because, well, it would keep frozen for long periods of time without losing any flavor. A Siberian hunter would throw a bunch of frozen pelmeni into a bag in his backpack, and he would be all set for food for the duration of the time that he was gone hunting. Most all Russians know how to make pelmeni, and most to all of them will agree that homemade is much better than store-bought. But because it is quite time intensive, most Russians do buy their pelmeni from a store. I mean, if a couple of family members work together as a team, you can form kind of a pelmeni assembly line and make quite a few of them. But herein lies part of the problem. The finished pelmeni, unless they are to be eaten all that time, well, they need to be frozen. And they need to be on a non-stick surface without touching each other as they're freezing. After they're frozen, you can simply pack them into plastic bags with a meal's worth in each bag and put it away in the freezer. But the problem is finding the kind of space to accomplish the freezing process. This requires a great deal more space, both flat space and freezer space, than the average person has, unless you live in Siberia and you have a separate pelmeni house. I find that pelmeni, as in times past, is best made in winter. You can flour a board, place the board on the balcony in order for the pelmeni to freeze without freezing together and sticking to each other. Just place them apart a little bit on the board. I have fond memories of the first time I made pelmeni. We did it at the apartment of our friends. We went old school with this. We bought the meat fresh and cut it up, then ground it up. While the men were taking care of the dead animals, the women were making the dough. Our friends were purists, and they rolled their dough into a long log-type form, then cut off slices, which were then individually rolled into the small circle of dough which we use when we make pelmeni. Here's the 2002 mark proudly holding up my first pelmeni. Yes, it's a day I'll always remember. Now, we made quite a large batch that day, but had a great time together doing it, and I can see where it could be a fun family affair in old-time Siberia or modern-day Russia. Our Vladimir and Yelena would also hide a small nut in a few of the pelmen. Now, pelmen would be singular for pelmeni. If when you were eating you discovered a small nut in your pelmen, you would get a wish or something. I don't really remember the reward. Maybe the reward was just getting a nut. I don't know. If you're just making enough for one meal, then this is really a lot of work. This is the primary reason why Russian people most often buy them at a store already made. Now I'll explain some drawbacks to this, and I'm going back early 2000s when I speak of this. For some inexplicable reason here in Russia, these companies that make pelmeni are not at all consistent, or they weren't. I mean, there's hundreds of companies. I mean, you'll find a brand that you like, and several times you buy it, you like it, you buy it again, you like it, then you buy a bag and it really tastes like crap. Plus, they're not cheap. It's really quite aggravating. Another unspoken reason, at least back in the early 2000s, for preferring homemade is that when you make it yourself, you at least know what goes into it. When you buy it, you do not. And trust me when I say that it could be filled with horse meat, dog meat, or even human. And although I may be exaggerating to the extreme, it's still not out of the question. I've read some stories which make me not really in the mood for pelmeni. Now, whether it's homemade or store-bought, cooking it is done the same. First, you boil some water in the same manner as if you were going to boil some pasta. I prefer to salt the water a little bit. When it comes to a boil, add the pelmeni. Stir it fairly frequently at first to avoid having them stick to each other. And after a few minutes, you don't have to stir. When the pelmeni floats up to the surface, continue to boil them for 3 to 5 minutes more. I then drain the water, but many people use the water as a kind of soup, and it does taste good. I usually put the drained pelmeni back in the pan and I add some butter to them. This adds a nice flavor and it also prevents them from sticking together. Now you're ready to serve them. It seems that as many people as you ask, you'll find different ways in which people top their pelmeni. One of the common ways is to use smetana or sour cream. I usually salt and pepper them a little bit and then top them with some sour cream. If I have more time and feel more creative, I'll add crushed garlic to the sour cream and a Georgian sauce called anjika. It's kind of a red spicy stuff you can buy in a jar. I add these to the sour cream and let them sit for about an hour in order to get all the flavors diffused throughout the sour cream. Now others use mustard. And just a side note, Russian mustard is quite good and also pretty hot. Some use vinegar, others may use mayo, some use ketchup, plus I'm sure that there are a lot of other variations. Having a shot or two of vodka along with your pelmeni is also not unheard of. Now, the dough is made from like water, flour, egg, and salt. Although you can buy this dough already made in almost any food store, the dough is unleavened, meaning there's nothing in it that will cause it to rise. It's not like bread. My wife buys the dough already made and even cut into the size circles that she needs to make the pelmeni. I make my filling from ground pork and ground beef, while maybe about a 50-50 mixture. Additionally, I add a lot of finely chopped onions, a lot, pressed garlic, basil, salt, and pepper. The traditional Siberian pelmeni is made with a mixture of about 45% beef, 35% lamb, and 20% pork. Although I'm not so sure of this because, the Siberian hunters, I think, who lived off pelmeni used what they killed, which probably would not be these animals. It might be venison, deer, or even bear. I somehow doubt that these hunters used the beef, lamb, pork method stated above, but that's what I read. The key to a good pelmeni is to not have the dough very thick to start with after rolling it out. Maybe half the thickness of a piece of cardboard, or even thinner. A purist will first roll the dough into a log-like form about 2 centimeters in diameter. They then slice off pieces and roll each individual piece into a thin, round thing, maybe 5 centimeters in diameter. I use the non-purist method. I roll a large sheet out to its final thickness and then use the lip of a glass to cut the sheet into small circles. I just find that for me this method is faster and it works well. At this point, you add about a heaping teaspoon of the meat mixture. You put it in the middle. One edge is folded over to meet the other, so that it is now a semicircle. I then crimp the exposed edge and then pull the two ends together and crimp them. At my home, perhaps every 2 months, my wife and daughters would form an assembly line and produce enough pelmeni for about 6 meals or so. In the Russian city of Izhevsk, which is somewhere in the Volga River region, in the year 1995, a sculpture celebrating pelmeni was unveiled. The sculpture features a pelmen speared on the end of a fork. The fork itself is more than 2 meters high. Now, prior to this, Izhevsk was more well known for being the home of the Kalashnikov rifles, or in the West we would call them AK-47s. If you come to Russia, make sure that you try out this very Russian meal, and it won't be hard to find. Even if you're here as a tourist, pelmeni is served everywhere. If you have a chance to try homemade pelmeni, then jump at this chance. Sit around a table with some Russians, enjoy some pelmeni and also numerous shots of vodka. Before long, you'll be singing songs together and speaking great Russian. Well, I hope that you've learned a bit about this traditional Russian food. And if you're not Russian, that you have an opportunity to try it. So, until my next video, пока.